I arrived in Palm Springs, which is in California, and I was doing a course in what's called quantitative electroencephalography, which is you put a cap on the head, EEG recordings, you get these maps of the brain, and from those maps, you should be able to tell the client maybe what's going on. And I arrived at this course, I think it was about maybe like a 5-day course. I sit down randomly at one of the desks, open my manual. You would not believe what was on page 1. I'll tell you, because you can't guess it.
What?
It said exam. And I'm looking at it going, why are we doing an exam at the beginning of the course, not at the end of the course? And there's a map of a brain there, and I have no idea what it is, because I didn't study enough. And the question basically says, where would you train? And it's one of those exams that if you don't know what that image of the brain means, you can't do the exam. And everyone was using different images, so it was different case studies. But the person next to me, he was already a practitioner in neurofeedback. I knew this, so I nudged him. I showed him my case study and I'm like, what's this? And he looked at my brain thing and he said, oh, you've got a really difficult case there. And I said, oh, that's great. It doesn't help me answer the question. And I said to him, what would you do in clinic? And he said, Ondrej, for something like that, I probably would ask the client. And I remember thinking what a weird answer that is. I would ask the client. And I said, what do you mean you would ask the client? He says, well, what I would do is I would touch their head and I would do muscle monitoring, to find out where the stress is. And I thought he was joking. I'm like, I don't even know what you're doing here. And he says, oh, well, there's this technique called, kinesiology, like muscle testing, where you can find out where the stress is in the brain. And I'm like, is this a real thing? Is this a field or whatever? And he's like, yeah. And eventually I told him I'm from Australia, and he said, look, Ondrej, if you're from Australia, there is a great college in Melbourne called Kinesiology House. You should go there and train there. I'm like, oh, but I'm from Sydney. It was an interesting conversation, but, let it go. Anyway, 6 months later, to cut the story a little bit short, I found myself in a different state in Australia. It's called Brisbane in Queensland. And I'm doing a course in neurofeedback. And I had the biggest deja vu of my life. I come to this course, I randomly sit down at a table, open my book, guess what? Exams. I should have known. And I've managed to sit at exactly the same case study that I had 6 months ago, but I didn't actually learn what it was. I'm like, oh God, I'm going to flunk the exam again. So I nudged the person next to me, someone different, and they said to me, look, this is a frontal lobe problem, interior gyrus up here. And I'm looking at my image. I'm like, is it left or right? I did not know. I'm like, left or right? And they go, oh, something like that. I would ask the client. And I'm like, you're kidding. You do that kinesiology thing. and he's like, yes, you know it. I'm like, no, I don't. I've heard of it, where can I learn this? Maybe in Sydney. I thought maybe I could do a workshop. And he's like, I don't know anyone in Sydney, but there is a place in Melbourne called Kinesiology House. And here's a true story. I walked out of that workshop. I went to a payphone. This is before mobiles. And I called the college in Melbourne and I said to them, look, I've heard of this thing called kinesiology. Maybe you can touch the head, find out some stress. Is this what it is? And Charles Krebs, who I was talking to, he said, Ondrej, how much time have you got? And I said, about 5 minutes on the payphone. And in 5 minutes, he described to me a system that would allow me to integrate all the things that I've just spent learning in the last 5 years. I literally went around the world. I did neurofeedback. I did, primitive reflexes, sound therapy, this, that. And he's someone telling me, this is how you put it all together. So I got really excited, and I said, Charles, when does the course start? And he said, Ondrej, I love your enthusiasm, or ADHD, depending on how you want to look at it. Here's your problem. We don't take people unless they do a face-to-face interview. I said, well, I'll do a face-to-face interview. I'll fly down to Melbourne. It's only 2,000 kilometers. when do you start? And he goes, that's your second problem. We start tomorrow. I said, oh,
I was
well,
about to say.
and it's a 2-year course. It's not a little workshop. It's a 2-year course. And after pondering on it, I thought, you know what? I'll see you at 4 o'clock. I purchased a one-way ticket to Melbourne. I got in and I started my training in kinesiology. And, it's one of those things that I was always taught when I was growing up, which is if you have a gut feeling about something, you need to follow it.